Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. I hope you're happy, healthy and well. It is time for a new review where I share some of the life lessons I learned from this book, J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace. You may have heard of this author. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature, but for this book, Disgrace, he won the Booker Prize in 1999. A lot of very deep themes in this book and themes that will stick with you long afterwards. Now, if you're someone who's thinking, I don't want to read something highfalutin, I don't want to read something kind of so bigwig because he's won the Booker Prize and he's won the Nobel Prize, this is actually quite readable. In fact, all of J.M. Coetzee's books are quite readable, but I think you've got to be in a certain mindset to read them. Be in a mindset that you are prepared to start be thinking about what he's mentioning and what he's writing about, but also a lot of his themes are all related to South Africa and apartheid and all the tension, the conflict and the relationships that occur between people in a society of tension. This particular book I read over a couple of days, and you can see that I actually bought the book because Coetzee for me is someone who, well, you mentioned the name, you gotta buy the book because you want it in your collection. It is a book that I'll read again. Now, once I read this book, I started writing my own thoughts, and there were a couple of pages of some notes that I took down here, which I'll show you in this video. Ultimately, this book is in two parts. The first part, we get introduced to the protagonist, whose name is David Lurie, and he's 52 years old, and he's a university professor and academic. He's someone who, as we read, we start to glean that he's the type of person of privilege. He's white, he's middle-aged, and he also lived through the apartheid years. This is set some years after those apartheid years, post-apartheid. So the society is still coming to grips with these new rules, new ways of relating to each other. But he strikes me as someone who's kind of going through the motions. He's someone who holds himself in a little bit higher esteem, higher above than everyone else. And you can kind of understand the type of personality that I'm talking about. So he does have this element of power about him. What we see is he has a prostitute. He goes to a prostitute once a week, pretty stock standard on a Thursday afternoon. He's a man of routine. And the prostitute, Soraya, he spies one day on the street with her little boy, and he follows her and basically stalks her until she cuts that connection and says, do not contact me again. So in that sense, I read it as a contract. He doesn't know where you draw the line when it comes to certain relationships, whether those relationships are with his daughter, whether those relationships are with his student who we get introduced to afterwards, whether those relationships are with other men, in particular black men, Petrus, who we also get introduced to. He has this relationship with the prostitute. She cuts it short. So again, we're gleaning some information about what he's like as a character. And he moves his focus then to Melanie, and he follows Melanie, who's a student of his, a black young student, who I read as quite naive and quite, I guess she doesn't have power, and she's naive and seems to go with the flow with him. But he latches onto her, follows her around, and somehow many times he just kind of shows up at her place or forces her to be with him. Even though she went along with it, there was a power imbalance here, and he should have known better as an academic, as someone in the university. So it comes across that people then start to find out about his inappropriate relationship, and even the university board was very interesting reading about this, because the men kind of seem to fob it off. It's kind of like they understood that, hey, you know, David, we're in a new situation here, you know, everyone's been in your position here, play the game, and you got to tell us that you are really sorry for your actions. And David came across as not being sorry, but he actively said, yeah, I was wrong, you know, I did the deed, but he didn't come across as very empathetic or sensitive to the situation. And the board wanted that apology. They wanted a heartfelt apology. Is it up to them to really express and ask for a heartfelt apology, especially when the other men also have been through a similar position and they too were also playing the game? I don't know. So the second part of the book goes in a completely different tangent. He decides to go to stay with his daughter, who runs this kind of dog community house, so people can give their dogs, but unfortunately their dogs are euthanized, and she looks after dogs. We find out that she is there by herself. Her partner, who is another female, so she's lesbian, has left her. We don't know the real story there, except that she is by herself. She welcomes her father to help her around her house, and also introduces him to Petrus, who is one of the black new landowners who is building a house right next to her, but also offers his protection and offers his skills around maintenance around the place. And we get this tension between David and Petrus, that there is something there, a black and a white, and the new feeling of trying to wangle how to talk to each other, how to relate to each other, being, I guess, men of a similar age, and also one black, one white. One is lost, being shamed in his work for having this relationship with a student, and the other one who is, I guess, now a new landowner looking to build. And we also get this suspicion that he too is also exploiting David's daughter, and also exploiting the situation so that he could build a life for his two wives and his clan. Now, something unfortunate happens, and that is that while David and his daughter are there isolated in this house, they get raided by a group of thugs. And unfortunately, the daughter gets raped by 3 of them, and they also shoot all the dogs. Now, we don't go into the rape scene. You don't read about the rape scene, so you can just imagine it. But David then, because he gets locked up in a room, they set him alight. He can't help his daughter. The part 2 is all about this, dealing with the fallout of this home invasion with the thugs. It was quite a violent attack, and David pleading with his daughter for her to go to the police and have it reported, but she flatly refused it. And I must admit, at this point in the book, I too started to question, why on earth wouldn't she report this? And she didn't obviously give a reason right until I guess the end of the book, where things got so desperate and David started to ask, well, why isn't she doing this? And that's when she explained her situation, and her situation was that of a powerless white person, a powerless white female in the middle of nowhere who wants to stay on this land, does not want to go anywhere else, does not want to leave the land, but who realizes for her protection and for her future to be solid and stable, she needs to have Petrus as a protector. And she offers herself as a new wife as part of this contract, that she could at least then have her life and have some safety and stability in her life. And this is something that David can't understand, and I admit I couldn't understand. But I think here, this is where what I got out of this book is that Coetzee now shows us the different interplay of the relationships between blacks and whites, but also between the powerless and the powerful, and how they get twisted, and also some form of contracts, and whether these contracts are love contracts or whether they are contracts for protection, for stability, for security. Everyone is playing a part, whether it was Soraya, the prostitute, having this contract with David for her to be with him every Thursday, Also the contract between David's daughter and Petrus as well, for Petrus's protection. But at the same time, throughout all this, it is David's journey. It's his journey of trying to understand and grapple with the new situation that is in South Africa, those new rules around society, rules. Sometimes I don't think he quite gets it. There is a part where he also has a relationship with Bev Shaw, and Bev is also in her 50s, and I didn't like how David talked about this woman in her 50s, because all of a sudden he seemed as if he had fallen down or stooped down to the level of the rest of society. He prided himself in the past of being able to get younger women, to get women and to sleep with them. He didn't want to marry them even though he was divorced. And his wife also cottoned on to kind of like his character and would chide him and tell him to pull his head in. We get this opinion, he has this very inflated opinion about himself and his virility and sexuality with younger women. And so I think he's trying to show that he's not aging in some way. And yet he stoops down to the level where he has a relationship and an affair with Bev Shaw, who is the lady who euthanizes the dogs in this centre. He comes to the point where he starts helping her at the centre. He helps her euthanize the dogs. He helps get rid of their bodies. You know, if you are someone who has some trigger alerts around animal cruelty in this book, then I would say do not read this book, because there are plenty of situations where this happens. And so we get this viewpoint that, oh, he's changing now. He's actually seeing how society works. But in actual fact, no, he doesn't. He keeps turning it back on shame, on how much shame he feels, but also that he seems to reduce or stoop his level, and he doesn't believe he's at that level to stoop to. He quotes poets' No Country for Old Men. It's kind of like he realizes a realization, oh God, I'm old now. I had an affair with Bev. Look at me now. Look at what I've become. And he quotes literature, and he quotes this Yeats poem, No Country for Old Men, which then I looked up and I read, and it is all about someone getting old and feeling sad about getting old. And it made me think maybe there are, I'm at an age now in my 50s where now I'm only coming to terms with getting old. There was in my early 50s and late 40s where I didn't like the fact, and I was, going through a certain phase in a woman's life. There is, a lot of changes happening where you start to question a whole heap of things, and you start to hate how you look and what your hair is like and how frumpy you feel, and you just feel different when you're in your 50s. So anyone who's a lot younger out there, you're going to go through this. And so I always start to wonder, are men going through the same thing? And I'm sure they are, but in their own way. I think this book was also one way of coming to grips with understanding of what men are going through. Sure, there are questions that I had, and I thought, God, that's weird, and why would he do this? And geez, I wouldn't do that. But when you read something, you put yourself in the position of the protagonist, and you don't do something what they do. Hopefully you can understand why they're doing it, but I didn't feel as if the protagonist, he really understood himself. He hadn't got onto that transformative journey and accepted it and made it a heartfelt acceptance, much like the university board telling him, you've got to have this heartfelt apology. We really have got to feel it from you that you really feel sorry about what you did to this woman. And yet by the end of the book, I still didn't feel that way. I kind of felt like I was kind of understood the university board, if you get my drift. And then I also started to think, well, there are people like this in our lives. So what? We might all go on our transformative journeys in our 50s and start to question the way of the world and our part in the world, and face our fears of getting older and losing our virility or sexuality or whatever it is, somehow changing. There are some people who still kind of grapple onto it, and they think, no, it's not happening, and are deluding themselves about it. And I think that's quite sad in some way. So in some way I think, well, David probably just didn't get it either. Look, that's all I want to say about this book, Disgrace. It is one of the top 100 influential books to read, so in that sense, highly recommended. But I just have to warn you about the animal cruelty and the trigger alerts that you might get out of this book. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. Bye for now.